Selene Duskbane was only 19, yet her eyes carried the weight of lifetimes she could not remember. For her story began not in laughter and kinship like the other wolves of Silverfang, but in blood and silence, found 3 years ago on the edge of the border with her body torn, her skin streaked with crimson, and no memory of who she had been before. To the pack that took her in, she was a mystery they tolerated but never fully embraced, a stray wolf child moulded into their ways, her back bent to every duty, her heart eager to belong, her voice soft with gratitude even as whispers gnawed at her. Stranger, they called her, lowborn, tainted blood. She felt those words as cold fingers brushing her spine each time she walked through the village, each time mothers pulled their children close when she passed, each time hunters looked away as though her very shadow threatened to stain their boots. And yet, despite it all, she gave herself wholly to the pack's rhythm, rising before dawn to carry water, scrubbing the stone floors of the elder hall until her knees bled, stitching hides by firelight with aching hands, all to prove she was worthy of a place among them. At night, when her body was sore and her soul hollow, she wandered to the riverbank where the black water mirrored the moon's face, and there she whispered silent prayers that her heart might one day feel as light as the silver glow across the waves. For in her loneliness she clung to one tether of hope, Corvin Hale, heir of Silverfang, the boy who had found her when she stumbled half dead at the borders, the one whose hand reached out when no one else dared. He had promised her once, long ago when her fear was raw and her nights were sleepless. "With me, you'll never be alone again." Those words had stitched themselves into her spirit, sweeter than any lullaby, fiercer than any vow, and she held them like a secret, ate fire whenever the cold of rejection crept too close. Tonight, that promise was meant to blossom into forever, for the crimson ceremony had come, the sacred rite that would bind them as chosen mates, sealing her place in the pack, silencing the whispers, proving to all that she was not an intruder, but a bride worthy of their heir. As dusk fell and the silver pines stretched tall and ghost-like beneath the rising moon, the pack gathered, their torches lighting a wide circle around the sacred clearing, the air heavy with anticipation and the sharp tang of pine sap burning in the wind. Selene stepped into that circle with her heart trembling like a bird in a storm, dressed in white cloth spun by her own hands, the hem embroidered with threads she had dyed herself, every stitch a prayer, every fold a plea for belonging. The firelight licked across her pale skin, catching the faint scars that marred her arms, the proof of her survival, and though her body was fragile, her back was straight, her chin lifted as though daring the night to call her unworthy. Around her the crowd murmured, their voices low, eyes sharp, judging. Some stared with pity, others with disdain, and many turned away, unable to reconcile the thought of their heir binding himself to a girl with no name, no past, no family. Selene heard their whispers like the rustle of dead leaves, each one cutting deeper, but she forced her lips into stillness, her breath into calm, her gaze forward toward the altar stone that gleamed pale beneath the moon. Corvin was already there, tall and radiant, the flame of his lineage burning in his bearing, his golden hair tied back, his silver eyes sharp as tempered steel. He stood as if carved from legend, every inch the heir they adored, every inch the saviour she had clung to. And when his gaze fell upon her, for the briefest heartbeat, her chest swelled with aching relief, as though the world and all its cruelty could not touch her so long as he saw her. She remembered the countless times he had smiled at her in secret corners, when he had shared bread, with her in the kitchens, when he had whispered stories of their future beneath the hush of trees, and she had believed him, believed that against every odd she might find belonging through love. But as she drew nearer, the unease that had stirred in her veins all day grew sharper, coiling like a serpent beneath her ribs, whispering warnings she could not name. The torches hissed in the wind, shadows leaping across the faces of those who watched, and though her lips curved in what she hoped was a steady smile, her wolf stirred restless beneath her skin. Something was wrong. Something in the air tasted bitter, metallic, foreboding. Still she walked, her steps slow, measured, her white dress brushing over pine needles that cracked softly beneath her bare feet, her pulse thundering in her ears. The elder's voice rose, low and commanding, summoning the moon's blessing upon the right, speaking of unity and devotion, of the ties that bound wolves together through eternity. And Selene's throat tightened because for her, this was more than a ceremony. It was her salvation, her chance to be seen not as an outsider, but as one of them. She reached the altar and placed her hands upon the cold stone, the rough surface biting into her skin, grounding her. Across from her, Corvin mirrored her motion, his fingers long and steady, though his eyes did not quite meet hers, and that small absence of warmth pierced her more sharply than any blade. The elder raised the ceremonial dagger, its silver glinting beneath the moonlight, the symbol of severance and union alike, and the crowd leaned forward, eager to witness the binding. Selene's breath caught, her gaze locked on Corvin, silently pleading for the promise in his eyes, the vow in his voice, the future he had painted for her in stolen moments. Yet, as the wind hushed, as the fire cracked low, the unease inside her swelled into dread. For something in his stance had changed, a stiffness, a distance, and when he finally did look into her eyes, there was no warmth there, only shadow. The night itself seemed to hold its breath, and though her heart screamed for hope, Selene felt the first tremor of her world beginning to break. The hush that had fallen over the silver pines did not lift with the elder's chant, nor with the crackle of torches or the restless shifting of wolves pressed shoulder to shoulder in the sacred circle. Instead, another sound wove itself into the air, low murmurs, rippling like a tide, not directed at Selene this time, but at something larger, darker, far more unsettling. The name passed from lip to lip, a whisper clothed in dread and reverence alike. The scarred Alpha, the Northern King, Kael Draven, a ruler wrapped in blood and rumour, a beast of war who had clawed his way to a throne of stone in the Citadel of Ice. The stories painted him as merciless, a monarch whose victories were written in ash, whose face bore the map of every battle he had survived, a visage so ruined that children were warned never to speak it aloud beneath the moon. Some said he was cursed, others that he was blessed by death itself. No pack had dared send him a bride. No daughter who entered his court was seen again. Some claimed he devoured them in the shape of a wolf. Others swore he discarded them when they failed to withstand his rage. Whatever the truth, his name alone was enough to freeze the marrow of even the bravest warriors. And tonight, beneath the crimson light of the ritual moon, that name slithered into every ear, making even the proudest silver-fang wolves glance uneasily toward the edge of the clearing. Selene had not meant to listen, but she could not shut out the words. Kael Draven. Each syllable struck her chest like a hammer, unfamiliar yet heavy, carrying the weight of inevitability. She had heard fragments of such tales before, in kitchens when the women thought her deaf to their chatter, in the tavern when drink loosened the tongues of young hunters, but never had. The stories felt so near, so alive as they did now. She drew in a breath that tasted of pine smoke and fear, her body trembling though the night air was still. Why should his name be spoken here, during her binding ceremony? Why tonight of all nights? And why, as the whispers spread like wildfire, did she suddenly feel eyes upon her? It was not the gaze of Corvin, who stood stiff and distant at her side, nor of the elders, nor of the pack that had never loved her. This gaze was colder, sharper, heavier. It felt as though it peeled away the layers of her soul, seeing not the white dress or the trembling hands, but the raw truth buried beneath her skin. Selene dared to lift her head, and the crowd parted as if pushed by an unseen wind, a narrow corridor of shadows opening between the flickering torches. There, at the very edge of the clearing, half shrouded in darkness, stood a man. He did not step forward. He did not speak. Yet the weight of his presence bent the air itself, making even the proud alphas present hold their breath. His frame was broad, shoulders straight beneath a cloak of wolf fur dark as midnight, his height such that the tallest warriors seemed small by comparison. But it was not his stature that made Selene's blood turn to ice. It was the mask of silver that covered half his face, gleaming faintly in the firelight, the other half marred by scars that caught the light like claw marks upon stone. One eye burned through the shadows, a storm-grey flame that pinned her where she stood. Selene's breath faltered. She had never seen him before, yet in that instant she knew. This was Kael Draven, the ruthless king, the scarred wolf of the north, the very monster that the whispers feared to name too loudly. And he was watching her, not the crowd, not the elders, her. His gaze carved through the night and through her body until her skin prickled and her woe self stirred uneasily beneath her ribs. She wanted to look away, but the weight of him held her captive, a thread of invisible power binding her eyes to his. The pack, sensing his attention, grew restless. Wolves shifted uneasily, shoulders brushing, voices dropping to fearful murmurs. Why would the scarred alpha gaze at her? What interest could he have in a low-born girl, a stranger with no past? Selene heard the whispers swell again, sharp as knives against her ears, and she tried to steady her breath. Her fingers dug into the cold altar stone until her knuckles ached. She had thought the ceremony's unease came from the tension with Corvin, from the hostility of the pack, but now she realized there was more, something deeper, something that had been waiting in the dark. Kael did not move. He did not approach, did not speak. And yet his silence was more deafening than any roar, more terrifying than any threat. His shadow stretched long behind him, merging with the forest, and Selene could not shake the feeling that he had stepped out of some nightmare the moon itself had conjured. Still, beneath the fear, another sensation stirred, faint and bewildering: curiosity. Why her? Of all the wolves gathered beneath the sacred pines, why did his eyes not stray from her face? The elder's voice faltered for the first time, stumbling over the ritual words as his gaze flicked nervously toward the edge of the clearing. Even Corvin, so composed and proud, shifted his stance, his jaw tightening as if to mask his unease. But Kael did not waver. He simply watched, and in his silence the torches seemed to burn lower, the night growing colder, until Selene shivered in her white dress, her heart thundering with a question she dared not speak aloud. Why? Why was he watching her? The night seemed to hold its breath as Kael Draven's shadow lingered at the edge of the clearing, but the elders dared not delay the rite any longer. The deep boom of drums began, slow at first, then faster, echoing through the silver pines like a heartbeat summoned from the earth itself. The voices of the chanters rose, weaving ancient words into the air, their tones meant to bless, meant to sanctify, meant to bind two souls together beneath the crimson gaze of the moon. Torches hissed as the wind stirred them, sending sparks spiraling into the sky, and Selene felt her stomach twist as she stepped forward, her body trembling beneath the weight of 100 watching eyes. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment she thought would silence the whispers. But as the circle tightened around her, unease dug deeper into her bones. Corvin was waiting at the altar stone, his shoulders proud, his silver eyes cold, and though she reached for the memory of his warmth, it seemed further away than ever. Before the elder could raise the binding words, a soft voice broke through the chant. It was honeyed, almost sweet, but sharp enough to slice through Selene's heart. "Careful, Selene," Lyra Veyra murmured, stepping lightly from the crowd like a serpent uncoiling, her white healer's robes fluttering as though the night itself made way for her. Her smile was small, delicate, and filled with venom. "Poisoners don't make good wives." The words, spoken so clearly, so cruelly, seemed to strike the circle with a force no drum could match. For a heartbeat, silence fell, and then laughter rippled outward, low at first, then louder, cruel voices eager to seize the moment. Wolves leaned in to whisper, some snickered behind their hands, others did not bother to hide their disdain. Selene's cheeks burned as though fire had crawled beneath her skin. Her throat ached, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, but she refused to let them see her falter. She lifted her chin, her wolf snarling low inside her chest, begging her not to shrink, not to break. Yet still the whispers came, biting, mocking, eager to tear her down. Her gaze darted instinctively to Corvin, to the boy who once promised he would never let her stand alone, and she searched for him to shield her with a glance, a smile, any sign of the vow he had made long ago. But what she found made her stomach turn cold. His silver eyes, so striking in the firelight, were laced not with comfort but with doubt, shadows of mistrust clouding what should have been love. It was as though he too had begun to believe the venom dripping from Lyra's lips. Selene's breath stuttered. She wanted to cry out, to demand why he would doubt her, but the words caught in her throat. The drums thundered on, drowning her heartbeat, and the chanting rose higher until the Alpha's voice broke through, deep and commanding, cutting across every murmur. "Bring forth the vial!" he bellowed, his authority ringing through the circle like a storm. At once the crowd hushed, anticipation buzzing like a hive of hornets. Selene's blood turned to ice. The words barely made sense, yet her instincts screamed that something irreversible had just been set in motion. 2 guards stepped forward, their movements deliberate, heavy boots crushing pine needles beneath them. Between them walked Lyra, her hands clasped delicately before her, her expression the very image of sorrow and duty. In her palms she carried a small glass vial, its contents dark and swirling, shadows caught in liquid form, an aura of wrongness radiating from it so strongly, Selene's wolf recoiled. Lyra lifted it high for all to see, her voice ringing out sweet and clear. "Shadow poison," she announced, letting the words drip with gravity. "The very poison that stole the life of Elder Miriam." Gasps shuddered through the circle. Mothers clutched their children tighter, warriors scowled, elders bowed their heads in grief. Selene's own breath froze in her lungs, her body stiffening as though struck by a blade. Elder Miriam, the grandmother of the pack, our kind hands that had once offered Selene bread when others turned away, a woman beloved by all, gone, and now her name shackled to this lie. Selene shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. No, but Lyra's gaze never left her, gleaming with triumph. We found it, she declared, lifting the vial higher. In her dwelling. A collective murmur surged like wildfire, suspicion thickening the air. Selene stumbled back a step, shaking her head harder. That's not mine. I've never... Her protest faltered beneath the weight of so many accusing stares. The words felt thin, fragile, breaking even as they left her lips. The Alpha's voice thundered again, sealing the accusation in the air. Murder! He growled, his power rippling through the clearing. The evidence is here for all to see. The crowd roared, some with outrage, some with grief, some with grim satisfaction. Selene's heart pounded so hard it hurt. Lies. Spun so perfectly, woven so tightly, she could hardly breathe beneath their net. She searched desperately for Corvin's face, begging silently for him to speak, to defend her, to tell them all this could not be true. But his jaw was set, his eyes cold, and in that moment she understood. The doubt had already poisoned him too. And as the drums beat on, as the torches flared high, Selene felt the ground beneath her tremble, her world crumbling not from the weight of her past, but from the betrayal unfolding before her very eyes. The words hung in the air like thunder, echoing in every corner of the clearing. Selene's ears rang, her vision swimming as the world tilted beneath her feet. The blade still glimmered in Corvin's hand, a cruel reminder of the bond he had just severed, of the promise he had shattered before the eyes of their pack. Her breath came in ragged pulls, her chest aching with the hollow throb of rejection. Around her, the crowd's murmur shifted into a stunned hush, as if every soul present knew the weight of the moment. For no one challenged Kael Draven when he spoke. He stood apart from them all, a looming shadow at the edge of the torchlight. He is scars carved deep into his skin, illuminated now in silver by the rising moon. They whispered of him often, how ruthless he was, how mercilessly he tore down those who dared defy him, how women who entered his halls never lasted long, but nothing could have prepared Selene for the sheer force of his presence. His voice was not loud, yet it carried with such authority that even Eldric Silverfang faltered, his sneer thinning to silence as though he too was not immune to the scarred Alpha's command. Selene's pulse pounded in her ears, every beat filled with dread and disbelief. Sold. The word cut her deeper than Corvin's rejection. Not chosen, not desired, but traded like a mere commodity to a man who ruled his citadel with blood and fire. She glanced toward Corvin, desperate for even a flicker of regret, a sign that his heart still remembered the promises once whispered beneath starlit skies. But his eyes remained cold, unreadable, silver-grey and distant, as if she were already a stranger to him. He tightened his grip on the ceremonial blade, his jaw set, but he said nothing, not a word to defend her, not a plea to take her back. The silence was worse than the rejection itself. The drums, once pounding with celebration, seemed to fade into a hollow echo in her chest. The air thickened, heavy with anticipation, as if the entire pack held its breath, waiting for Eldric's response. Selene's knees trembled, her body swaying under the crushing weight of humiliation, yet she forced herself to remain upright. She would not let them see her break, though inside her soul screamed, raw and unmoored. Eldric's eyes flicked between her and Kael, calculations sparking behind his steel-cold gaze. Power mattered more to him than blood or loyalty, and in Kael Draven he saw something useful, perhaps even profitable. His lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer as he lifted his hand, signalling the pack to silence. "So be it," Eldric declared, his voice echoing through the circle of pines. "She is no longer one of us. She belongs to you, Alpha of the North. The words struck her like a blow. Her breath hitched, her vision blurred, yet the world around her sharpened with cruel clarity. The torches flickering against rough bark, the shifting shadows of wolves in the crowd, the faint hiss of the wind weaving through the branches above. They were witnesses to her shame, their eyes filled with pity, scorn, or worse, indifference. Selene's heart hammered against her ribs as she lifted her chin, refusing to let tears fall. She would not gift them the satisfaction of her collapse. But Kael Draven's gaze, unwavering and fierce, caught her like a snare. His eyes were dark, fathomless, as if carved from obsidian, and though his expression revealed nothing, there was something in that silence, something that stirred a flicker of heat in her chest. Fear, yes, but not only fear. He stepped closer, each footfall heavy against the earth, the crowd parting instinctively to give him passage. The scent of iron and smoke lingered on him, as though the battlefield still clung to his skin. When he stopped before her, Selene felt dwarfed, small beneath the weight of his shadow. The scar that cut across his cheek gleamed like a mark of defiance, proof of battles survived, wars won, and nightmares endured. He studied her in silence, the hush stretching unbearably, until at last his voice rumbled low and steady. "You will come with me." It was not a question, not a request. It was an unyielding decree. Selene's stomach twisted, her breath faltering as every instinct urged her to flee, to run into the forest and vanish where no alpha's shadow could follow. Yet her feet refused to move, her heart caught in the storm of despair and disbelief. For in that moment she understood the truth she had tried to deny. Her fate was no longer her own. The citadel loomed like a fortress carved from the bones of the mountain, its towers clawing at the sky and its ire, on gates groaning with age each time they opened. Selene crossed its threshold with the weight of exile pressing against her ribs, the memory of her pack's rejection still echoing in her ears. Cold stone walls rose on either side, swallowing her in shadows that stretched endless. This was not home, nor sanctuary. It was a prison built from silence and steel. Yet here she stood, bound by fate to the man feared across kingdoms. Kael Draven, the scarred alpha of the Northern Citadel. His presence was colder than the halls he ruled, his voice cut like gravel dragged across iron, and yet, when she stumbled on the icy steps leading deeper into his fortress, his hand caught her. The grip was rough, calloused by years of war, but steady, anchoring her weight without hesitation. His touch burned and chilled all at once, leaving her confused. Was it duty? Habit? Or something he himself didn't understand? Days bled into weeks within those walls, each one a test of endurance. The pack here did not welcome her. They whispered, they watched, their gazes sharp as daggers. To them, she was not a bride, but an offering, a bargain struck to appease a scarred king who could not be denied. Kael spoke little in their presence, his words stripped to necessity, as though silence itself was his shield. He never promised her love, never draped her in honeyed lies the way Corvin once had. He was brutal honesty dressed in iron. "You are mine," he had said, "nothing more, nothing less, an unwanted bride, bound by decree." Yet in the quiet between battles, in the hours when no one else watched, she felt something strange flicker in him. At night, when the moonlight broke across the citadel's towers, she sometimes caught him watching her. His mask concealed the scars that made others flinch, but his eyes betrayed him. They did not hold cruelty. They burned with something rawer, quieter, so ofter than fear. when she shifted restlessly in bed, when she flinched at memories of the Silverfang pack, when she pressed her fists against her ribs to silence her trembling. His gaze followed. It was as though he wanted to speak but didn't know how, as though he had forgotten the language of gentleness. Selene tested the fortress of her new existence. She trained among the wolves of the Citadel, though their scorn pressed on her like frostbite. She fell often, her body bruised and weary, but each time she rose again. Once, when her palms split against the frozen ground and blood streaked her skin, she thought he would leave her there. But Kael crossed the circle of training ground with steps like thunder. He knelt, his massive frame lowering to hers, and without a word, he bound her hand. His touch was deliberate, his fingers surprisingly careful despite their size. She tried to pull away, but he held her gently, as if she might shatter. That evening marked the first crack in his mask. When she bled again after a punishing session, she hid it, ashamed to show weakness. But Kael found her, crouched in the shadows of the courtyard. He said nothing at first, only crouched beside her, and then reached for her trembling hand. His voice, low and rumbling, carried through the cold air. "Scars make us stronger." He tore a strip of cloth from his own cloak and wrapped it around her wound, each movement steady, reverent almost. Selene lifted her gaze, and for the first time, he did not hide behind steel. He raised the mask, revealing the truth he kept hidden. The scars were jagged, stretching across his cheek like reminders carved by fate itself. They told the story of blades, of claws, of battles that had tried and failed to end him. She should have recoiled, the way others had. She should have looked away, but she did not. She saw not ugliness, but survival. His scars did not diminish him. They crowned him with the weight of every war he had endured. And then she saw his eyes, burning, alive, wildfire caged in sorrow. For a heartbeat, the ruthless king seemed onal, a man, scarred, yet unbroken. Selene's breath caught in her chest. The walls around her heart, built from betrayal and loss, shifted. She remembered Corvin's silver eyes laced with doubt, the way his hand had trembled with the blade that severed her future. And here was Kael, the man they all called a monster, binding her wounds as though they mattered. He did not promise her safety, he did not whisper love, but he gave her truth. His scars spoke of pain, but his hands spoke of care. That night, as she lay in her chamber, the wind howling through the Citadel's towers, Selene could not silence the echo of his words. "Scars make us stronger." She pressed her hand to the bandage he had tied, feeling the warmth of his touch lingering still, and for the first time since the night of her rejection, she did not feel like nothing. She felt seen. Kael, alone in his chamber, removed his mask and stared at his reflection in the frost-lined mirror. His scars stared back, reminders of why he had built walls higher than the citadel itself. Yet tonight, her gaze haunted him. She had not flinched. She had not looked away. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the weight on his chest felt less suffocating. The fragile thread of quiet that had begun to weave itself between Selene and Kael did not last. It was too delicate, too easily frayed by envy and ambition. The citadel, though colder than the mountains it was carved from, was not immune to poison, and it arrived cloaked in familiar perfume and a serpent's smile. Lyra Vera stepped through its gates like a shadow that had waited too long for the right hour to strike. Her voice was honey dipped in venom, her words sliding from lip to ear until the halls themselves seemed to whisper with suspicion. "She carries poison in her veins," she murmured to Kael's counsel, her tone low but sharp enough to pierce. "A wolf will, if no past cannot be trusted. Look at Silverfang. Look at what she did there." Each syllable was crafted with precision, designed not to accuse outright, but to stir unease, to remind the lords and elders that Selene was not of their blood, not of their trust. The whispers multiplied, crawling through corridors, seeping into chambers. Guards who once only stared now sneered. Servants carried trays with eyes narrowed and voices hushed. Selene felt it in every breath of cold air, every shadowed glance. She had survived rejection, exile and scorn before, but this cut deeper, for now she had something to lose. Because within her a spark had already taken root. In the stillness of night, when the fires burned low and the fortress walls held back the howling winds, Selena pressed a trembling hand to her belly. A secret warmth thrummed beneath her palm. A child, Kael's child. The thought made her heart ache and soar all at once. She had not planned it, had not even dared to dream of such a thing, yet it had come like a gift in the dark. For the first time since her rejection, she smiled without forcing it. Hope, love, a reason to fight. She guarded the secret fiercely. Alone in her chamber, she whispered to the life growing within her, promising safety, promising a future better than the one she had known. But fear walked beside her joy. The council had begun to circle Kael like wolves hungry for weakness. They saw Selene not as a mother, not as a mate, but as a flaw in their king's armor. And Lyra, always watching, always waiting, was quick to twist that flaw into danger. Kael's council pressed harder with each meeting. Around the great stone table, beneath the banners of battles long won, their voices rose like a storm. "Marry into the Iron Fangs," demanded Lord Dareth, his gaunt face as rigid as the granite walls. "Strengthen our alliance before their claws tear through our borders. Cast the girl aside. She brings only unrest." Others echoed him, their tones sharp, insistent. "The North cannot stand alone. She is an outsider, a burden we did not choose. One woman is not worth the ruin of kingdoms." Kael sat at the head, his massive frame unmoving, his scarred face unreadable beneath the weight of their accusations. Yet his silence only fueled their hunger. They wanted blood. They wanted sacrifice. They wanted her gone. Selene heard pieces of these meetings in passing, scraps carried by whispers she was not meant to catch. Each word lodged in her chest like thorns, cast aside, expendable, poison. She returned to her chamber, pressed her back against the door, and wrapped her arms around her belly as though she could shield her child from their voices. She wanted to be strong, to believe Kael's silence meant something other than consent. But doubt gnawed at her, the same doubt she had seen in Corvin's eyes before the blade had fallen. In the dim light of her chamber, Selene closed her eyes. She thought of Kael binding her wounds with his rough, steady hands, of his voice rumbling like thunder when he told her scars made them stronger. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that beneath the scars and silence he would fight for her. Yet the council's words lingered like ghosts, reminding her that kings bowed to war before love, that crowns weighed heavier than hearts. Lyra's presence grew like a shadow at dawn, impossible to ignore. She moved through the citadel as if she belonged, her voice sweet, her gaze sharp. When she passed Selene, she dipped her head just enough to mock, her lips curving into a smile that carried secrets Selene could not unearth. And each time, Selene's wolf bristled beneath her skin, urging her to bare teeth, to fight. But she did not. She could not yet. The child within her shifted one night, the faintest flutter, a reminder that life beats stronger than fear. Selene's breath caught, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered into the dark, "You are mine. Whatever they say, whatever they take, you are mine." The words steadied her, a vow carved into her bones. But outside her chamber, the storm grew louder. Kael's council would not relent. Each meeting pressed harder, each voice demanding the same choice: alliance with Ironfang through marriage, or war that could drown them all. And every time they spoke of casting her aside, Selene's hope cracked a little more. Kael's silence became its own mystery. He did not echo the council, but he did not silence them either. His mask remained, his scars hidden, his gaze turned to shadows. Selene longed for one word, one sign that she was not alone in this fight. But the halls stayed cold, the council stayed hungry, and Lyra's whispers spread like frost across stone. The throne room was heavy with smoke and firelight, torches flaring against stone walls that seemed to lean inward, pressing the weight of judgment upon all who stood within. The banners of the citadel hung high, their dark colours shifting with the draught that crawled across the chamber, but even their proud display could not mask the tension thickening the air. Every breath, every glance, every whisper coiled into silence as Kael Draven rose from his seat, his scarred face half hidden behind the mask that had become his shield. His eyes, however, gleamed with the cold fire of decision. Selene stood in the centre of the hall, her hands bound though she had committed no crime, her body trembling though her chin lifted stubbornly. She had endured whispers, endured exile, endured the cruel barbs of Lyra's tongue and the council's disdain. But this moment, this was different. This was judgment not from strangers, but from the man she had begun to trust. The man whose scars had seemed less frightening than the emptiness of his silence. She waited, breath caught in her throat, her pulse drumming against her ribs. She waited for his choice, for his voice to cut through the lies, for their fragile bond, for their unborn child, for the hope she had dared to let bloom. Kael's jaw tightened, the muscles shifting beneath scarred skin. His hands, resting on the arms of his throne, curled into fists. For the briefest instant, Selene thought she saw hesitation flicker in his gaze, a tremor of something unspoken, a war raging within. Her heart leapt on that flicker, desperate for it to mean salvation. But then his voice cracked through the chamber like thunder tearing the sky. "She means nothing to me." The words slammed into her like a blade. They were cold, absolute, delivered with the weight of a king, not the faltering warmth of a man. The hall erupted in gasps, the council's hungry eyes gleaming with satisfaction, Lyra's lips curling in triumph. Selene's knees weakened, but pride alone kept her upright. Her vision blurred, her ears roared, and yet the words echoed mercilessly within her chest, tearing every fragile thread of hope she had stitched together. Guards moved forward, their armour clanging, their hands seizing her arms with merciless grip. She staggered under their force, her body dragged across the marble floor, as if she were nothing more than the council had named her, a burden, a mistake, a shadow unworthy of standing in the citadel's light. Still, she turned her head, desperate for one final look, one sign that the man who bound her wounds, who showed her his scars, had not lied in silence. But Kael did not move. His scarred face remained unreadable, his throne an anchor he refused to abandon. The doors thundered open as the guards hauled her into the storm. Rain lashed down, cold needles striking her skin, drenching her hair, blinding her eyes. The world blurred between water and tears. Her lungs heaved, and yet her voice broke free in a whisper, meant only for the life within her. She pressed her hand to her belly, her fingers trembling as her lips shaped the vow. "I'll protect you," she breathed against the storm. "Even if he won't, I'll keep you safe. I'll love you enough for both of us." The guards dragged her through mud and stone, their grip bruising, their faces indifferent to the storm or the woman they hauled. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating her broken figure, her white gown stained with rain and dirt. Every step away from the citadel felt like another fracture in her chest, but she clung to the warmth inside her belly, the single flame that refused to die even as everything else crumbled. Behind her, the great doors slammed shut, sealing her exile with a sound that echoed like final judgment. Selene stumbled forward as the guards released her at the gates, discarded like a forgotten relic, her body collapsing against the earth. Rain soaked through every layer, but she forced herself to rise, forced herself to stand through the weight of betrayal dragged at her bones. She looked once more toward the citadel towers, their black stone vanishing into the storm. Somewhere within, Kael still sat upon his throne, his scars hidden, his silence louder than any war drum. Her lips parted, her throat raw, but no cry left her. She had no words left to give him. Only the promise whispered to her child remained, clutched close to her heart like a blade turned inward. Selene turned from the gates, from the fortress that had nearly taught her love, and stepped into the storm alone. Each step was heavy, her body trembling, but she moved forward, away from stone and steel, away from the man who had betrayed her. Her wolf, though weakened, stirred within her chest, a low growl threading through her veins. She was not finished. She could not be. For her child, she would endure. And as the rain fell harder, the storm swallowed her figure, but her vow burned brighter than the lightning that split the sky. The storm did not relent. Rain poured down in endless sheets, blurring the horizon into a smear of grey and shadow. Selene moved through the downpour, with steps that faltered yet refused to halt, her gown clinging to her skin, heavy with mud and water. Every breath burned her chest, every gust of wind bit her raw, but she pressed onward, clutching the promise in her heart as though it were the only flame left in a world gone cold. She had no destination, no haven beyond the storm, yet her will dragged her forward, for the thought of collapsing now felt like surrendering her child to despair. Behind her, the citadel loomed, its towers barely visible through the veils of rain, but she no longer looked back. To turn her gaze upon that fortress was to reopen the wound that still bled within her chest. His words lingered, sharp and merciless, each syllable a scar she could never erase. "She means nothing to me." They echoed in rhythm with her footsteps, mocking her, clawing at her, threatening to break her resolve with every repetition. She swallowed hard against the ache in her throat, whispering once more to the fragile life sheltered inside her body, as if the child could hear and give her strength. "You are not nothing," she said, her lips trembling with the force of her vow. "You are everything. You are my reason." The storm surged around her, drowning her words, but she clung to them, speaking them into the night, willing them into existence. Her wolf stirred faintly within her, a presence battered by grief, yet unwilling to die. It growled low, a reminder of instincts buried deep, of survival older than sorrow. Selene drew upon that growl, letting it carry her forward when her legs shook too fiercely to move. The path became a blur of stone and dirt beneath her, her feet stumbling yet relentless. Each step away from the citadel seemed to strip another piece of her former self, peeling away the girl who once hoped for love, who once believed in bonds sealed by destiny. What remained was raw and fragile, yet edged with a determination she had never known she possessed. She could not afford to collapse into grief. She could not afford to let her despair consume her. For within her heart's beat was another heartbeat, small and steady, pulsing with life. Her body ached, cold seeped deep into her bones, but when she faltered and nearly sank to her knees, she forced herself upright. Lightning flared above, splitting the night in jagged brilliance, and in that blinding moment she saw herself reflected in the puddles at her feet. Drenched, broken, yet unbowed. Tears mingled with rain as she whispered to the storm, "I am not finished." The road stretched onward, twisting into shadows that the moonlight failed to reach. Each gust of wind howled through the trees, branches bending as though the world itself mourned with her. Yet Selene did not yield to the sorrow. She embraced it, letting it fuel her, letting it sharpen the edges of her heart. Pain had carved her hollow, but in that emptiness, strength was taking root. She walked until the world blurred into exhaustion, until her breath rasped in shallow gasps. When at last her legs gave way, she sank to the earth, her body trembling from cold and hunger. But even as she lay there, face pressed into wet soil, she wrapped her arms protectively around her belly, her wolf growling faintly through her lips, as if promising her child that no harm would come. The storm raged on, yet inside her, a fragile spark still glowed, and she clung to it with the desperation of one who had lost everything, yet refused to surrender what remained. Her eyes closed, not in defeat, but in exhaustion, and in the darkness behind her lids, she saw not the citadel, nor Kael's unreadable face, nor the sneers of those who had turned against her. She saw instead a tiny hand reaching for hers, a child's laughter echoing like sunlight through shadows. It was only a vision, fragile as a dream, but it was enough to steady her heart. "Tomorrow," she whispered into the mud and rain, "I will rise again, for you." And the storm howled louder, as though bearing witness to her vow,